Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to Molten Modular. Today I'm looking at the mysterious, the deeply interesting, the confusingly extravagant, extraordinarily subtle and nuanced, brash, brassy and FMy Vector Wave from RKY Modular. It's both bizarre and beautiful. It has these extraordinary tones inside which sort of playfully fall about from being organ-esque, simple sine waves that are then wrangled and warped and wrapped in upon themselves to become other things. And then just when you think you've got the measure of it, just when you think, oh yeah, I got the hang of this, the whole thing turns itself inside out into some kind of 4-operator FM synthesizer. It's both polyphonic and multi-timbral. You can stack oscillators for an awesome monophonic experience of bass lines and leads and trippy melodies and all sorts of things. Or you can sort of pull out flutes and timbres of organs. You can pull in sections. You can multiply ratios and frequencies and push it about in unexpected ways. It doesn't perform like you want it to necessarily. It will do different things differently. And it is perhaps because it's a digital oscillator, a digital cluster of oscillators. It has an edginess to it, a brassiness to it, perhaps, which just loves to be softened with a bit of delay and a bit of reverb. So I'm going to keep some of that on during some of this, I think. Not all the time. I'll pull it back, I'll put it in, I'll pull it back. But it really seems to shine once you let those waveforms go into other processes. Because by itself it can overwhelm, I think. It can push itself too hard. But that might be what you like. I don't know, FM might be what you like. Is that what you like? I don't know if it's what... I mean, I like it, I don't like... We'll play with it. We'll get into it and we'll see what's going on. RYK were the company that gave us the M185 sequencer, which is a gorgeous, fun, interesting, multi-gated and faceted sequencer. But for this demo review, I'm going to be using the black sequencer from Erica Synths because it has 4 channels. And the Vector Wave can handle 4 things at once, which makes it really interesting. There's whole worlds in here, whole worlds, I tell you. The Vector Wave. So, I mean, you immediately think Vector Wave, you're thinking Prophet VS, you're thinking some kind of Korg wave station kind of styly thing, and it does have elements of that. And there is this adorable and cute little joystick here, which absolutely follows that functionality through. And so you can treat it as a Vector Wave synthesizer, if that's what you want. But as I say, you'll find that as you twist things about, it can actually just be a regular oscillator. a stacked or clustered, chorded, frequency ratioed and multiplied and divided oscillator. So what I'll do, I'll drag you in, we'll have a poke around at it nice and close just to see what makes it tick, to see how it works and how somehow within this single module of just 8 knobs and a joystick, you can access all of the bits and pieces, because there is going to be some menu diving here. We're going to have to get beneath the surface of this fantastic big pixel display, which is a thing in beauty all of its own. The design of this thing, I really, really like. There's something about it. I mean, I spoke to Jake of RYK to ask him, what was the inspiration? Was it Bauhaus? Was it minimalist? Was it some other form of interesting design? And he went, I just sort of fiddled around and that's what sort of came out. But there's something about it which is understated and yet has this extraordinary display. He says it was inspired by things like the Synclavier and the way that dealt with wavetables and FM, which is very interesting. But it's like gloriously straightforward and yet hideously complex all at the same time. And I think perhaps during this video you'll see me stumble about a little bit because the menu does take some learning. There's a bit of a learning curve into getting into things, and you will always find yourself where you don't expect to be and clicking the thing that you weren't expecting to click in the place that you possibly weren't expecting to turn it. But you'll see all of that. So let's go in, let's have a look, see what this is all about. So here it is, the Vector Wave. I've got this plumbed in through the Qubit Nautilus and Aurora for a bit of delay, or a bit of weird delay that we don't quite understand, and a bit of reverb that we don't really understand either. So that's going to add just some nice oddness and space to things, but I'm going to keep that down and just to a bit of a minimum for the moment. Now you can see I've got all this stuff patched in, which I'm going to take out because all of this over here is through the optional expander. Now the expander is a glorious thing that allows us to have 4 separate inputs into here rather than the main one, which is the CV and gate inputs here. And you can run it all on a single, because you can run it as a single monophonic sound source, or you can run it polyphonically via MIDI here. The basic essence of the Vector Wave is that there are 16 sine wave oscillators inside. It's a digital oscillator. These are 16-bit digital sine waves, and they are arranged into 4 banks, A, B, C and D, which you can access via the red button here. Ignore the numbers for the moment. They don't mean anything like what you think they may mean. So each of the 4 banks of 4 oscillators can be treated independently, or perhaps more commonly you'll treat them all together in a vector wave style. Oh yes, because in vector synthesis what you do is you get a waveform and you stick it over here, you stick another one over here, one here and one here, and then using a joystick or some other form of something or other, you can move between those waveforms in order to create new timbres within the mixing of those waveforms and to create movement and modulation between things. That's the basic idea. And at the moment I've got essentially an initiated patch which gives me 4 banks of 4 oscillators all behaving in slightly different ratios to one another. So if I run something through it, we can then use our little joystick to move between those waveforms. So this is A over here. Move that towards B. Round to C. Round to D. Or anything in between. Now at the moment I've just got an initialized patch, so it's all sine waves, there's nothing funny going on, so it's a very gentle and subtle generation of tones and harmonics. So this is kind of how you fall into this module. When you start off, you're going, what on earth am I doing again? And you start fiddling with things. And I'll show you what you first arrive at with this kind of combination. So let's go all the way over to A. So only hearing A. Let's load up A on our screen. See, we've got 4 ones. This refers to the oscillators and their ratio, their frequency ratio to each other in terms of harmonics. So the top row here controls the harmonic number. The bottom row controls the volume, but only currently. There will be a lot of other situations where it does things differently. So as I turn the volume, you can see that the volume of the fundamental is up nice and high. And I can bring in other harmonics. Now at the moment they're all on the same, so you're not really getting the sense of that, but if I start putting these up, all the way up to 32. If we go to B, we set that, see that set to second harmonics. So we need to bring in the other harmonics and then put those to something. And then you can morph from A to B. And we've still got C to play with. And D. And as I say, tends to be the first place that you play. I mean, if you put nothing into it, you can sort of use it as this incredible drone machine. Which tends to overload itself a little bit. You get the idea. You bring in harmonics and that adds to the tone or the timbre of the sound. So if we go into the grey button here, into our Q menu, which is like our quick performance controls, we have a number of different options. We've got cross modulation, which we'll come to in a minute. We've got wave warping or something. We've got FD, which for the longest time I thought was feedback, but it's not, it's folding. And we've got detuning. So let's just see and hear what sort of effect that has. So detuning. So that has a lovely effect of just pushing those oscillators apart, just to give them that little bit more juice, which is lovely. Now the warping here, this one pushes the sine wave into some different waveforms. So it goes somewhere approaching triangle. Oh look, that's no longer working. I'm now in some other form of mode. No! I've gone into crazy mode. So for warping mode, as you... crying out loud, is it here? Okay. So for warping mode, as you bring it in, you are slowly changing the sine wave into a triangle, triangle into a sawtooth, sawtooth into a pulse, or something approaching that. So you can very quickly start from your lovely little sine wave and just push it into something a little bit more aggressive and then detune it. Ooh, it's getting nice now. And then the folding option. Just massively increases the complexity. So let's show this off with something a little bit funky. So let's come back to our cluster of 4 oscillators and then dial in something more juicy. While we're here, let's have a look at the envelopes. So envelope number 1. You get a lovely display of an envelope which is controlling the VCA inside the module. You get this display telling you exactly where you are on the envelope. So using it as a 4 oscillator harmonic cluster, I'm now just running it through a bit of a filter just to give it some spice. Now, one interesting thing is that this menu here, the detuning, folding, warping, is actually global. It's happening to all 4 banks at once. So as you move to the other banks with the joystick, the same thing is going on. So wherever you put your vector wave, it's the whole output that's being controlled by the folding, the wave warping, and the detuning. Let's take the filter out of the equation so that we've got the full stereo sound coming out of this, because that's actually another interesting factor. See, I was going to try to do this in some kind of ordered fashion, but hey, let's just stumble into what we stumble into. You've also got output, so you can push things around in a lovely stereo spread. Because what I like is that there's so much stuff in here, you find yourself going off exploring in different directions, trying to keep it back to something simple so we understand what we're doing. Here's our just A. And these are harmonics. This is harmonic synthesis. There is a way to tune them. If I can find the right button, there is a way to tune them. So if I bring it back to, let me think about this. If I just bring it back all to 1. Bring it back to sine waves. I can press the top buttons here and detune the oscillators. So let me bring in something slightly harder that we can hear. So you can actually detune all of the oscillators to create chords. In fact, they've thought about that a little bit more. There's a whole chord system in here somewhere. I just want to put it back to some kind of normality. If I can remember where that is. Yeah, I think I can. Initialize, no, odd. So within this particular menu, which is a menu for the banks, you can copy one bank to another. You can initialize currently all of the banks or individual banks. You can add all of the harmonics in, or odd harmonics, or we can randomize stuff. which might be fun. So for instant tonal differences, you can do that. If I go back to initialize, give me something simple. Now in here, what was I looking for? Now you've also got a cluster option, which will create some other tunings. And within there, you'll find something lovely from time to time. You can just go on and on finding new sounds. But what I was actually looking for was the chords. Yes, so if we look at what this is doing, go back to come out of this menu, trying to remember how. You can see this is the tuning that it's set up. So plus 18 and plus 49, because these are not semitones. This is tuned in frequency ratios, I believe, in hertz essentially. Each one being 100 hertz. Is that right? I can't quite remember. So you can dial in your own chords if you have the ear for it and save them, but in the chord system itself, if I can remember how to get there. No, I can't remember how to get there. There we go. You have a choice of, I believe it is 14 chords. But there's no way that you can add to that list currently. You can load and save individual oscillators, banks. So rather than loading an entire patch, you can load just individual A, B, C or D banks within the banks you're doing. Or at least I think so. But just within a single bank, a single 4 oscillators, what the heck does that mean? You can make some lovely tones. This perhaps would be a good opportunity, as I've got the keyboard sat here, to show a little bit of the polyphony. For polyphony you will need MIDI, which plugs in here. Now you have to go into the menu, so you need to turn MIDI on. With MIDI off, it's being addressed by CV, so I can turn this on, put it onto channel 1, to what this is on, I believe. So that's now being controlled via MIDI. It does all sorts of MIDI things. You can patch CC control over various parameters, you know, although it's sort of interesting MIDI type of stuff. But what I'm interested in at the moment is the mode. Now the mode is currently in vector mode 1. There's a couple of vector modes which I might explain later, but what we're after is poly mode. So you've got 4 notes. Which is using a cycle of all 4 banks. it definitely has an organ flavour to it. And what it does is that it uses bank A and copies that across all the other banks. Otherwise it would just kind of be a bit of a mess. And that's just rather beautiful. Now, you're not doing vector synthesis in this. You're not using 4 banks separately. The banks are being combined to give you this polyphonic experience, and that's a lovely thing. But you know, in the gaining of that polyphony and that interest, there's the loss in the configuration and the manipulation you can have through the vector waves. But hey, you know, there's pros and there's cons, but that's quite a lovely thing. And you just keep playing. I mean, you just keep pushing around the folding, the warping, the detuning, and then the harmonics. Right, let's go back to vector mode so that we have our vector synthesis stuff going on. Let's talk a little bit about modulation. So we've had a look at the envelopes. Bring ourselves back over to A. Get rid of some of this effect. Still using MIDI for the moment. So under this envelope LFO button here, you can set envelope 1 and envelope 2, and also LFO 1 and LFO 2. I mean, you can't find the LFOs. You have to actually turn a knob and then the LFOs appear, and then you can't find the envelopes until you turn a knob, and there they are. I'm not going to keep going over what the knobs do. You're going to have to learn those things for yourself. But I mean, you know, I've got wonderful visually represented envelope here, which is just amazing, and I can route the second envelope to pretty much anything. For LFOs, I can choose, oh, you see LFOs are on the bottom knobs, and I can choose the type, ramp, square, rising, sawtooth, sine, and that whatever, and then the speed. You've got this lovely thing here showing you the speed, but it's not going to anything yet. So let's send it to something. To do that, you press the mod button. You've got 6 slots to send it to things. Now let's go for LFO 1. There it is, twanging about. We're going to send it to bank A. We're going to send it to... What do you think? That bit or feedback? Oh, panning. That's quite nice. If we send it to the fold, we can then just turn it down a little bit and have it nicely move around the place. And we can set this one here, I think, as an offset. We can set it higher or lower. And then this is the depth. So that's quite nice. And you've got, as I say, 6 slots. You can put different things in. So in the second one, I could stick in envelope 2, for instance. Let's turn that to warp. Envelope 2, which is here. Now you've got these 4 inputs down the bottom here, which you can also use as modulation from external sources. Use another slot, and then you've got you know, M1 to M4 here, which you can then route to whatever you like. There's all sorts of stuff in here you can route things to. There's panning, as I said, feedback. There's also a bit of a band pass, and a band pass filter and a low pass filter stuffed in here somewhere. It's not usable in a way that you would use an external filter, but it definitely gives you something to play with. Now the modulation can be individual per bank, but you've still only got 6 slots in total, 2 envelopes in total, 2 LFOs in total. It's not 2 LFOs per voice. Alright, while we've got something going, let's have a look at the vectors. We can animate this vector joystick movement business. Now we do that by using a modulation slot, and if you want it free running, you can have it triggered from the gate. If you want it to change every time, just do a little flip every time it's gated. Or you can use one of the CV inputs, and if you patch nothing into it, it's then very much free flowing. So I've got it set up here, coming into CV1, I think. Is that what that means? I'm not entirely sure. No, that's envelope 1. So I want it to set to CV, got it going to vector, and then go to our vector menu, which looks very much like Pong. I mean, this is just the other half of the screen from when you're doing folding and warping. The bottom half is to do with this vector business. So you can see that's already working because I've been fiddling with it trying to work out how I do it. But how you do it is you press this button to record, and then you do your movement. Not sure that took. Okay, there we go. Alright, suffice to say I don't really know what I'm doing, but you get the idea. I've now got an LFO, I think, speeding up and slowing down through this vector movement, which is controlling this joystick thing here. I mean, hours of fun for all the family delving into that, and this is only one of the modes. If we go to vector mode 2, it's different. Now this is different, and you see the LFO is still moving this about. And what vector mode 2 does is that you pick a spot for each of your banks, if you like, and it moves from one to the other. Does that make sense? So I can move that one over there, move one there, and one there. So I've now created 4 positions that it's now moving through. The LFO is going from one side to another, and it's picking out all of those positions. So I can put them all down, for instance. Yes. Very nice, I hear you say. So, just to pull things a little bit together at this point, you've got these 4 banks of 4 oscillators, which just play beautifully by themselves as like a little cluster oscillator that you can detune, you can fold, you can push into triangle and pulse wave-esque type bits and pieces to give you thunderous leads and bass lines and interesting bits and pieces, or exploratory, experimental, tonal organ sounds. And then you can shift between those 4 banks with the joystick, pushing from one sense and timbre into another feel and vibe, and into another, either quickly or smoothly or slowly. You can animate that. You can add envelopes and LFOs to move various bits around in much more beautiful ways than I could possibly demonstrate in the ham-fisted way that I'm presenting this module. But that's just my style, man. Or you can go polyphonic and play some lovely 16 oscillator chords using 4 voices, which you can again modulate together. You can push those harmonics around the place. You can mix harmonics and mix between your waveforms on the joystick. So there's a whole party of stuff going on in here. And there's one more thing. So after all of the loveliness of the vector wave, we do, at some point, have to embrace the FM. Now, for many people, of course, the FM side will be exactly what they're after. This is the key. This is the highlight. This is the top performer, the headline act. Not for me, however. I like all that other stuff. But regardless of which, this is a massive FM sound source. And if FM is your thing, then this is an extraordinary place to play. Let me what I'll do, I'll attempt to demonstrate it in the poor FM skills that I have in this context. I will show you how it works, and then I'll load up a couple of presets so that you'll perhaps appreciate it a little bit more. So I'm still going in via MIDI. I've just got standard things going on. I'm going over to bank A here, which I've got set up in its own sort of organ way. Let's bring that back to something sensible. Now, to access FM mode, all you've got to do is press one of these buttons here. And you find you've got these little dots, these little squares. Now, these squares have become operators, and you can now turn these into carriers and modulators by pressing it down. So this one is now modulating this, which has become the carrier. You can put that across to many of them, and also in parallel as well as series, in all sorts of crazy algorithmic configurations. But let's just start with something simple. And the idea is, because this is to do with ratio, it's to do with envelopes, it's to do with cross modulation. Those are the tools within the vector wave that you have to manipulate the frequency modulation. So ratio to start with. Initially not that different from how it was in the first place. That's because there's two other factors that kind of need to be brought into play, and those are in our quick controls from the main global place where we do the wave folding and the wave warping and such like, and that's this cross modulation thing here. And it seems to be, as far as I can tell, this thing here which kind of dictates the depth of the frequency modulation. So if I wang it all the way up, you can hear how it's more FM-y. Now, of course, the level is going to have a factor as well, because you're going to want the carrier to be up, which is this one, and probably the modulator to be not quite so much, depending on how crazy you want it. But of course, as you play with these algorithms to put more and more stuff into it, it becomes more extreme. So it's a veritable playground of FM tones. Now, the other factor is envelope 2. Envelope 2 controls the level of the cross modulation. So rather than me fiddling about with this, trying to attain some kind of unobtainable FM nonsense, if we go through a couple of the presets, it will load up some FM tones and give you an idea of what it sounds like. I mean, that's a great example of how playful this thing becomes. How you find tones that just sort of fall into each other and then cascade and fold into another one. And you can pull in that folding. You can then pull in the warping and drop it out, and the whole thing changes. The whole thing tumbles. I mean, I don't even know if there is. Oh, there is a bit of FM in here. But again, you can bring that in slowly with this knob. It doesn't have to be there. You can tone it all the way down to something simple, just basic waveforms, and then do a little bit of detuning, do a little bit of folding, do a little bit of warping, and then bring in the FM tones as it starts to spark and it starts to get complicated, and it starts to find those bits of noise around the edges of its digital clashing through to our terrestrial dimension. And then we find ourselves back at the beginning, back in mult mode. I've got 4 channels of black sequencer coming in here. Each of these is now taken away from the vector and has been operated as its own thing from a channel from here. So if I go down to channel 1, just something very simple. Channel 2, or B, something very similar. Nothing funny going on. Channel 3 going into C. Now this does have something funny going on. We've got a little bit of operator set up here, some modulators and carriers. We've then got envelope 2 going to C. So this envelope 2 is controlling the cross modulation on C only. And we can see envelope 2 here. Channel 4 is also got a little bit of FM set up. Now Now what I could do on slot 2 is pick up an LFO and route that just to D, cross modulation. So that's FM2, this one 2, it's just a sine wave. Endless fiddling. The one thing I think that it lacks, really above and beyond anything else, is individual outputs for the 4 banks. Because now I'm playing it in multi-mode, which is lovely, and I've got 4 different things completely, well, not completely independent things going on. 4 independently addressed, but folded in the same way, warped in the same way, and outputted through the stereo output, through these effects all together. Now there is a little bit of mixing you can do over changing the levels of the various harmonics or by panning it around, which is very, very useful. But I can't address the 4 banks completely individually and then process them differently. So I can't treat it as 4 oscillators entirely. I can't have one like going through a filter, another one going through an effect. It all comes out of the same output. That's the only thing that's lacking, but then that would make for a larger, again more complex module. And when it's running in other modes, then having everything come through the same output makes absolute sense. So in some ways multi-mode is an additional bonus to what's going on as opposed to an original feature, if that makes sense. But in this single row of modular with a 4-channel sequencer, with the vector wave and a couple of effects, you've got quite an extraordinarily powerful system in just a single row. So the RYK. Vector wave, then. There it is. Vector, harmonic, additive synthesizer, 16 oscillators, 4 banks of 4, clusters, randomization of harmonic content, harmonic spectrums, frequency multiplications, ratios, all that then tumbles down into a crunchy FM synthesizer with multiple operator algorithms. I mean, he's not messing about. He's not messing about. This is not simple stuff. This is thoughtful, mindful, a deep and interesting synthesis pulled into a small module with an interface that just about keeps you in there enough to want to keep on fiddling. It can be a struggle. There are times where I'm going, I just don't know why I'm not getting the thing happening that should be happening when I press this thing type experience within the menu. But inevitably I get out of it. But there are moments where you break the illusion of workflow in trying to find, where the heck am I now? What is supposed to be happening at this point? And why is it not doing the thing that I think perhaps it should? So there are levels to it which you have to navigate, you have to understand, you have to dig down to. I mean, I remember when I first got this out, I think I did it on a live stream. I plugged it in and played with it for the first time. And what I got out of it was those harmonics, that organ sound, that fundamental with the harmonics playing around it. And it was a very beautiful thing. And I kind of assumed that's what it was about. You'd create like different organ sounds and then you'd move between them from the joystick. And then when you'd load up some of the presets, you'd go, well, this is not about what it's about at all. This thing is like crazy with noise and edge and metallic bangings and clangings. And it wasn't actually until I spoke to Jake at Synthfest that I realised that it's actually really an FM synthesizer. It's kind of what it's all about, or what it leads you to. But I would suggest that on the way to FM, there's a lot of great stuff. The folding and the warping, just that little section when you've got something thumping through it, when you've got your 4 oscillators that start to detune, and then you start to fold them. That's really quite delicious. And because you can set up 4 lots of that, you can slowly move like morphing through a wavetable, but you're morphing through or mixing through vector synthesis from bank of 4 to bank of 4. And there's something very lively in that, something very malleable and playable, something that keeps you on your toes as to where it's going to be next. I mean, you could see it as overcomplicated in that you've got to deal with 4 different sections of something in different ways, and which one am I on again? And the fact that you press the red button in order to access D, but then if I press it again, I'm on to A, and I've got to go back around to D. Am I on that? And then is it this? No, it's not. I meant this one, and I'm changing that. Then how am I getting to, Such is the nature of menu-based systems. But I don't think the menu should be a barrier. It may be a barrier to some, sure, absolutely. In which case, this is not for you. If you want one knob per function, then no, this is not for you. But you can get in there. I mean, I don't like menus, and yet I've been drawn in because of the sort of sounds that it's creating are quite extraordinary, and I've been fascinated to find out what it can do and then what it brings. I mean, messing around in FM, it's something which, I mean, if you give me a DX synthesizer, then fine, I can program it, no problem. I had one as a kid. But when it comes to this sort of in-your-face, standalone ratio understanding of frequency modulation synthesis, it's hard, When people talk about the complexity of it, really, even though you've got very few controls here, the complexity is in how do you find a sweet spot? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Can you do it just by intuiting your way through, by feeling your way through, which is like how I like to do synthesis? Or do you really have to know what you're doing? And maybe, just maybe, you have to know what you're doing. Otherwise, it's just kind of clangy, noisy stuff that you get. But that, I don't think, takes away from, even if you have no FM knowledge, there's a heck of a lot of interesting waveform and timbres you can get out of this in multiple modes, whether that's polyphonic or monophonic or in multi-timbral mode to play with. So yeah, I mean, it's not an instant module. It's not the sort of thing you can just turn on and start getting a sound out of, although obviously you do, but it's a sort of module that you have to massage. It takes work. There is a bit of an uphill climb, certainly to start with, and that is something that I think you just have to deal with. It's a barrier to get over because it requires your attention. It requires a bit of thought, a bit of concentration and exploration. So it's going to take time. If you just want to turn on your rack and start playing with music and stuff, then perhaps this is not going to be what this is about. This is something that you have to set up. It becomes creating the sound within the module, the combination of harmonics, the combination of oscillators is part, I think, of the music making process with this. You can save stuff. So there's that. So you can create your map, if you like, your landscape of waveforms and sounds, and then save it and come back to it later. So perhaps that's the answer to that question. The lack of outputs is a shame. Also, you can't take out modulation. The LFOs and the envelopes inside are purely internal. You can't bring those out because it would be nice, for instance, when you are gating and triggering in here, that you could also take that envelope out into a filter or something of that nature. But it's very much self-contained. There's probably lots of things that I haven't shown you, like, for instance, the harmonic view, which shows you a spectrograph, I think it is, of the harmonic content, which you can then move about. What happens here? Does that go up and down? Yeah, move about like that. Ooh, clever. You could change the way the display works, how quickly it comes back. I've spoken about clusters and randomization, initializing patches, in creating all harmonics or harmonic content with odds and evens and other bits and pieces. There's tons and tons of synthesis, of really good, deep synthesis stuff in here. And if that's for you, then you are going to have a wonderful time playing with this thing. I think I've spoken enough about it. I think I have. I can just keep going on and on, I think, but I think I've said enough. I think you should have the gist of it by now. It's available as a kit or as a pre-built. It's a beautiful, high-quality Vectorwave FM wave folding, wave warping, cross-modulating, detuning behemoth of a 16 oscillator 4-voice Eurorack module. That's the Vectorwave. Hope that's been helpful. In the meantime, go make some tunes.